in the context of where Confluent can play a critical part, it's also the interoperability integration with all the respective AI ecosystem. Now, if you think about what AI is doing, it's working across microservices, working across lakehouses, databases, could be a different endpoint service. To bring all that together and to do it in a secure manner and consistent manner, constantly serving that information is where I think, it plays the most pivotal role.
Welcome to Analyse Asia, the premier podcast dedicated to dissecting the pulse of business, technology, and media in Asia. I'm Bernard Leong, and the ability to harness data from real-life streaming has become a strategic necessity for generative AI. So with me today is Kamal Brar, Senior Vice President of Worldwide Independent Software Service Vendor, because ISV, and Asia Pacific and Middle East at Confluent, to help me to unpack the emerging role of data streaming platforms in the world of AI, and also how it's going to shape the future of Asia Pacific. So come on, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bernard. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I always want to hear origin stories and how do you start your career?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I'm sure some folks are kind of still thinking through what they want to do in school and kind of deciding what they want to actually end up doing. For me, it was pretty clear. I actually really had strong interest in electronics and computing at a very young age, I would say. So for me, it was kind of like I would want to pursue a career in computing. And back then, computing was kind of taking off, like in the late 90s. We didn't have, it was a lot of the curriculum in terms of universities was around software development. It wasn't really around mobile and all the other amazing technologies that came later, but it was around fundamentally software engineering and databases, right? So those were the two core areas. And so I ended up taking a Bachelor of Computing, which turned into Bachelor of Computing Science when it was rebranded. And so I was very much focused on, hey, I wanted to learn all about software programming. Back then it was Perl, Apache, MySQL, all that type of good stuff. LAMP stack. If you recall. So I was definitely into that. And so I did that as kind of like my foundational educational studies. But then I kind of was very fortunate, as I wrapped up my tertiary education, I got an opportunity to work for Oracle. And that was even prior to Oracle, I was working in an Optus, which was obviously a telco in Australia. And then I kind of shifted to Oracle, and Oracle was an amazing company. Back then anyway, it was like... Still is. But back then it was 25,000 employees. It was a very different company to what it is today. And, I'm sure if you're tracking Oracle, it's making a lot of interesting investments on AI. And so for me, it was just a great learning playground. Like I got to learn a lot about Oracle technologies, core tech. And then, I evolved from core tech to the applications, understood about, Oracle's applications. And then from there, I actually decided to take a leap of faith. And having spent 6-7 years in Oracle, I kind of wanted to experience something different. So, having worked in, as I say, the Oracle machinery, where you learn a lot and you learn about really some interesting technologies. It was the number one database company and technology company, you'd argue, at that period of time. But there was so much disruption kind of, I would say, on the onset. And so I got to learn from working in some of the most exciting open source technology companies. So, it's kind of interesting. My career's been a mix of data, but also, I've worked in 4 open source companies. So it's been amazing.
So one curious fact, because pre this conversation, I took a look at your background. You worked for Oracle, Hortonworks, and then now Confluent.
Yeah.
What drew you to say to data streaming, your present role, and what do you think about in all these open source technologies that gives you this common line thread in your career?
Yeah. So I remember I referred to the LAMP stack. I actually worked for MySQL for five and a half years. And that's where I got the bug, right? And literally, MySQL was a very small company. I think with 350 odd employees when we got acquired by Oracle. That was my second stint in Oracle. But it was just a phenomenal cult following. Like, back then when Facebook was coming together, it was all powered by MySQL and the database. Right. And you think about it, right? Now it's like a given, but back then, when Facebook was building its architecture for scale for mobile and web, there was no database of choice. And so I think that was kind of the era where we're literally in, I would say, a very fundamental part of the transition on the web. And, mobile hadn't taken off, but web was truly there. Social media was truly taking off. And so I think what attracted me to the Confluent story was, I always knew Confluent was a great company, great brand, done tremendously well. It kind of created the category of Kafka and data streaming. So for me, it was like going back to the core. I always wanted to come back to open source, and I'd worked in other technology companies, and so it was more for me to go back to something I enjoyed. So I'd been in MySQL, I'd been in Hortonworks, as you talked about. So I was just coming back to open source again.
It's always open source enterprise tech. So now you reflect on your career journey, right?
Yeah.
What are the kind of lessons you would share with my audience?
Yeah, I think the fundamental lesson I would say is, there are no limits in what you can achieve in any role, or in particular any company you go work for or be part of. Every company has very unique elements of learning. And so, there's different growth stages in a company. There are different technical challenges. There are different go-to-market challenges. And so when you think about all the things that have to go right to make a company so successful, it's kind of amazing, right? I mean, you see very few companies cross the chasm of, getting to $1 billion run rate in open source. MySQL were acquired quite early.
Yes.
Hortonworks we got acquired as well as part of Cloudera. So most of the companies don't get to that $1 billion run rate. I mean, obviously Red Hat was one of them and did really well and continues to do well. And I think,
Snowflake, Databricks as well.
Yeah, Snowflake, Databricks. And I think these companies, you think about it, all these technologies were open source, right? So if you look at what Databricks has come from with Spark, again, very much open source. So that's pretty exciting, right? And so I think open source has become, and definitely the foundational projects in Apache and the community have been really pivotal in defining the tech landscape.
Do you think the community is also part of the core of what makes open source software such an interesting part of your whole career journey?
Yeah, I actually, hidden secret, I used to be a contributor a long time ago. I don't write code anymore. But I think the community angle is absolutely pivotal. Without the community, it's very difficult to get the adoption. And so adoption defines kind of like the opportunity for us to do some of these more disruptive technologies. Otherwise, you'll be stuck in the most obvious, safer choice, right? And so I think the community enables us to do that.
Let's get to the main subject of the day, because we're going to talk about data streaming and AI readiness in the Asia Pacific and also Middle East, which we cover in the region as well. So maybe just to baseline to help my audience to understand Confluent better, because not everyone knows about all these enterprise tech companies. What's Confluent's mission, and how is it fit into, say, enterprise AI and data infrastructure landscape?
Yeah. So maybe just worthwhile for those of you who, your viewers may not be familiar with Confluent as a company. It started over 10 years ago, and the project was around Kafka. So Kafka today is a very de facto. People refer to Kafka as a pretty standard, but that's when it was defined. So, our three founders, Jun, Naya, and Jay, who's our current CEO and co-founder, kind of out of LinkedIn had this project, and so out of this project they ended up spinning out a company.
Yes.
But the challenge, of course, and if you're familiar with LinkedIn, is I only want to subscribe to information that's relevant to me, and to be able to consume that information efficiently. And just imagine the total volume of people who are on that platform, and then to do that efficiently and to be able to publish that data continuously as a feed that's relevant without having to keep, making a call. Like in the world of database, it used to be like, you'd query something and you get a response, right? So it's kind of like a request-based access, where this was continuous feed of information and real time. And so that's kind of how the company formed, and Kafka became one of the most popular Apache projects, and is still today a growing Apache project. And so the company over the last 10 years has kind of pivoted from becoming the de facto category creator in Kafka and data streaming to becoming the DSP company. And so, for those of you who are thinking about what DSP is, fundamentally, you have real-time event streaming.
Yes.
So we know that's number one with Confluent and Kafka. And then in addition to that, you need to be able to kind of process these streams, and so be able to manipulate or transform these streams. And that's where Flink became the standard. So, about 3 years ago, I believe, Confluent acquired a company called MRock.
Yes.
And so that's where we essentially brought the founders of Flink into our ecosystem. And so Flink and Kafka became one. Until today, that plays a very important role in the context of AI, and I'll explain a bit later. And then more recently, what we've done is introduced Iceberg. So Iceberg becoming kind of like the de facto table store format, or essentially the interoperability for Lakehouse, where you can kind of hopefully be able to share information between the data stores or databases, lake houses, and also the platform itself.
So I also have a stint when I was heading AI and machine learning in AWS for Southeast Asia, where one of the key things is usually in data streaming, specifically F1, for example, where you need a lot of events, and the key part of it, even for basic video analytics, is that a lot of people always talk about Kafka streams and actually using the Flink as part of the ingestion engine so that they can get that information on it. Maybe can you explain?
That's a great use case, by the way.
Yeah, that's a great use case, right? Yeah. But can you explain why data streaming is so important to AI now? I think I can understand it because I use ChatGPT every day.
Yeah.
And then essentially there's so much conversation streams going on in my chat window, but I think it's only just one stream. But if I start thinking about there are 500 million users suddenly all using it, the same thing, there's a very different conversation.
Yeah, that's very true. So, where's the context of data streaming platform and obviously AI? So I think there are multiple facets to it. The most obvious is you want to be able to do inference, right? And so when you talk about your querying or asking questions in ChatGPT or the prompts, as you call it, prompt engineering, you'd be able to understand the context of what you're asking for. And so in that scenario, majority of the technology or majority of the kind of I would say the models in some shape or form want to be able to store feedback loops. And so understand, hey, how did we make a decision? How did we get that data? Where was that data? And how frequently was this accessed? Or even things such as the metrics associated with that particular question, so that they can learn and train and be more efficient at the next particular ask, right? So, you may have you and I asking the same question in a different way.
Yes.
So it kind of needs to learn and be more efficient in how it can provide that data. So the inference part is super, super important. So being able to do that efficiently, being able to do that across multiple data sources, I think is very logical, and that's where Flink comes into play. So that's a very important part. The other part linked to that is obviously the model feedback loop, right? So to enhance the models, you want to be able to store that data for a long period of time, or at least be able to store it to understand how the models can improve. The most obvious is, as these models, look at not just web data, and if you think of the enterprise context, the models are generative AI, so they understand the web, they understand the machine learning training that's already happened on those models. Like you see ChatGPT or any of the models, they'll tell you when it's trained tool or and usually it's a little bit behind, right? But in the context of enterprise, they know nothing about your business, nothing, and for good reasons, right? That data is very much specific to your business requirements, and it's probably a competitive differentiator. And so that data cannot be publicly shared. And so how do you bring the power of the public, or I would say generative AI models and the enterprise models? And that's where, with obviously with Confluent, Kafka, and Flink, we want to be able to bring the inference. So you'd be able to essentially bring together and query these different data sources and endpoints. It could be an endpoint that's external, right? And then bring that data together very quickly and efficiently, and provide that kind of I would say the combined knowledge of both your enterprise data and also the generative data, and serve that to your user.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think a lot of people do not appreciate that actually a basic data stream is actually quite important for production level workloads. I think we are not talking just in the ChatGPT use case, right? When you think about even say a customer service chatbot,
correct,
where it's servicing say 1 million queries, I think that's when the strength of the data streaming provided by say Flink or Kafka, it becomes very, very essential for the customer. Yeah. So one interesting question I wanted to get to is there was a recent report on data streaming. I think it's published by Confluent. And can you talk? I actually get a chance to read it. So can you just talk about some of the key takeaways from that report itself?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I encourage everyone to go look at the report. But there are the three areas. I think the willingness to drive or leverage AI-based data technologies is very, very high. Of course, there are fundamental challenges with it. I think 89-90% of our kind of respondents said they're very eager to use the DSP technologies and kind of leverage this for AI.
But they also cited that the fragmented
data
source is one of the big issue, right?
Correct, yeah. And so that's been I would say just a tech debt, right? So a lot of the systems that you have in play today, if you think about the nature of these systems, you look at a bank, or you look at anything that's significantly, I would say, large in terms of complexity and size, you'll realize that it's actually a lot of work in just kind of you can't turn those systems off. There are a lot of legacy technologies that are built around it. So, you still have the challenge of data fragmentation, data silos, where departments or certain parts of the business may operate to a very specific requirement, and simply because of high level of governance or compliance.
Yeah, compliance, and then also
regulatory
separation of controls,
Correct.
access controls.
Yeah, and so that makes it very difficult for you to unlock, right? And in terms of, for example, a new fintech division or, a digital bank may be able to move much faster because whilst they still have the regulatory compliance, they don't have the technology debt and they don't have the legacy systems that they may have to, they would have built something ground up, which would have been more cloud native, would have been leveraging more of these emerging technologies. And so I think that in that context, it makes it much easier for them to go and accelerate. And what tends to happen is the fragmentation exists in large enterprise. And I would say more digital native or digital born companies, it's a less of a problem, right? Just because they have a new digital stack or a new definition, and I keep referring back to, if you look back in the old days of the LAMP stack, and that's evolved, Node.js and so forth, right? So the new tech stack kind of defines, I would say, the pace of innovation, right, on that front. But the data segmentation or siloed nature of that data continues to be a challenge. And so I think fundamentally, that's one area where, if you have standards-based interoperability or if you have a standard communication protocol, and, Kafka becomes one viable option, where if you have the ability to talk Kafka and stream in and out of Kafka, it becomes a much easier way to share data, right? So that's one challenge. The other one is, of course, skill shortage. Not everyone's got the skills.
Which
right?
I want to get to the point, right? So I think you got the point first about the tech debt. Then because of tech debt, also partially because of skill shortage, which is about 91% that was cited in the report. Why is the real-time visibility becoming such a critical differentiator for today? For enterprises.
Yeah, I mean, look at the engagement of how you interact with your applications. Today, everything you and I do probably is through a mobile device, right? I don't really need to log on to my laptop to actually engage in my mobile banking app, right? So today, if I want to make a transfer, in the good old days, I'd have to log into an internet browser. I'd have to log in, use my HSBC key or whatever bank I'm with, and I'd get a time-based authentication login. And I'll do my transfers. Today, everything is based on a mobile through, a notification that's, all through my notification will all in real time come to my mobile device, and I'll authorize transactions. But the whole interaction has changed to real time. And whilst I think in the past, the nature of the applications were that they were very responsive, they were web-based applications, but they didn't have the same demands in terms of real-time capabilities. And so if you look at the interactions with your bank, or if you look at interactions with your applications, like 15 years ago, 10 years ago, we didn't really have ride sharing, right? Now, being able to track where my Uber is or where my Grab is kind of a given, right? We kind of assume that this is normal, right? It wasn't the normal 10 years ago, right? And so, or whatever, the time when Uber took off and Grab took off. So I think in that context, the nature of how we interact with applications, how these applications actually feed data and just the relevance of that data becomes critical. Because just imagine if I'm if I'm actually looking for my Uber and that information is delayed by 5 minutes, it's probably not a very good use of data for us, right? Because that doesn't provide me the data I need in real time that I want for the context, which is I want to understand where my Uber is, what's my ETA to my destination, and so forth. So I think that relevance of context of time and the real-time nature, and we kind of live in this society where
it's the right here, right now.
Yeah, so right here. Everyone wants things today, now, right? There's no concept of I'll wait for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. If you ask ChatGPT a question, you probably want that pretty quickly. You don't want to wait 10 minutes for an answer.
But then when reasoning, you still need 1.5 minutes or maybe even like 3 minutes to get an answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think with the right models, obviously, they talk about fidelity and velocity in terms of the AI models. I think it's not just important to have the speed, but also the accuracy of response. And so in many occasions, it's, if you actually learn to use these tools properly, you realize you need to ask the right framing of the questions. And in some cases, you actually need to go use the right models. And when I'm using some of these tools, I'll actually enforce deep deep search, right? And so that I get a better, more accurate response versus getting the faster response.
So I think another interesting part of that report was that I think 94% of the people, I just make sure I get the numbers correctly, that AI use in business analytics is set to grow. But what are the more promising applications do you see gaining traction from your perspective?
I mean, I think if you look at enterprise applications, everyone's kind of shifting towards AI-enabled applications, right? And so most of the enterprise guys are kind of, or I would say the larger enterprise applications or technology providers are AI enabling their stack, right?
Yes.
So they're like, hey, how can we leverage AI to serve our existing customers better? Can we improve interactions? So they may introduce AI chatbot services. They may introduce better AI through support. So logging tickets or engaging in that. If I'm a customer service agent, can I get that experience better through a automated telephone or a AI agent? That's happening in the enterprise. So they're all kind of modernizing, I would say, kind of improving the quality of their interactions, improving the quality of their applications with their existing install base. Then you have this whole new category of disruptors, right? So you have interesting companies who are kind of building these voice to text. You have interesting companies, who are building kind of like all types of, I would say, interesting use cases around health science and so forth. Where if I'm a outpatient of a hospital, how can I make that more efficient versus a nurse calling me and checking up on my drugs usage and making sure I've taken my medication.
Yes.
How can I automate that process? And even things like counseling, believe it or not, where I want to be able to reach out to older care patients who may have certain requirements emotionally, mentally, which they need additional support on. And how can I make that an AI-led approach? And you'll be surprised, so much training has gone into obviously getting these models trained on certain drug types, medication, and not just that, even things such as understanding suicidal behavior. And so they look at all these things as being able to hopefully make it a better opportunity for them to serve, in this case, these patients. But to do it through a completely AI model or AI-led model has been quite radical. And those companies have gone from being very, very small to significantly large businesses. And so I think that's the interesting space. Like you've got a whole new category that tends to happen in tech every 10, 15 years. We see like the next innovation. And I think AI, definitely for my lifetime, will become the most important generational change for us.
Yeah, I think we went through probably 3-4 technological revolutions over the last 3 decades. I have foreseen, like, since we talk about the software engineering, then web, mobile, now AI.
Correct.
It's always moving so quickly. So what's the one thing you know about Confluent and the role of data streaming in AI that very few do?
Yeah, I think obviously the Kafka part is a given. I think Confluent's a category leader in that space. We've defined it, and we have probably the most, I would say, impressive cloud offering on the planet, and being able to scale it. However, to make that a seamless process across, being able to consume that as a service, as a true hybrid offering, is something I think our larger audience may not be aware of, and being able to integrate that across DSP, where you have the challenge of scaling Kafka, making Flink a very easy to use consumable service. And if you haven't experienced Flink, I'm sure you have in your experience with AWS, but Flink is a very complex engineering deployment. I mean, just the operational overhead of running Flink is challenging. And to consume that as a service seamlessly across all of our cloud offerings across GCP, Azure, and AWS is an engineering marvel, right?
Yes.
It's actually a lot of work. And I think that appreciation in some cases, like, because we just consume services, we don't realize the complexity, but the complexity of how we're running these systems at scale, and just our customers, we serve our 5,000 customers globally. It's quite amazing. So that whole seamless experience, being able to consume it through a cloud and then go back to on-prem and hybrid to address sovereign requirements, I think is pretty unique.
So can you walk me through, say, a real-world use case in Asia Pac or even Middle East where you actually help the business to unlock that value through Confluent?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say the largest use case that we've seen in probably in a long time is around the payments. If you think about the world of payments and how payments have been disruptive, in Singapore we have QR-based payment codes.
Yes.
So we call it Pay Now or Pay Now, depending on which bank you're with, but Pay Now being the standard.
Yes.
In the world of payments, and if you think of some of the larger emerging economies, in particular countries like India or Brazil, they have pretty unique standards and they have a very, very large population to serve. And so in India, we've been very closely working around some of these areas, in particular with the banks around payments. And so
through their UPI interface,
yeah,
right?
through UPI. So NPCI, National Payments Corporation
That's
in
right.
India, leverages a lot of Kafka, And if you look at the backbone of their stack, I mean, they have a Digital India stack, of course, which is largely open source. But if you peel the onion on that and you look through what's powering in the payment stack, it's a lot of Kafka. And so, being able to kind of like disrupt, but also serve a new generative way of accepting payments for a guy who's serving tea for a couple of rupees, and for someone who's doing large transactions, and to be able to settle those transactions across intermediary banks in real time at a scale of 1.3 billion people, I think is something that's been really, really amazing for that team to achieve. And so we played our small part, of course, being one of the largest contributors to Kafka, and we work closely with the respective agencies in making sure we build secure, highly scalable governance around that, right? Because it becomes mission critical infrastructure when you're serving the entire company's payments. You're also now down. If you're down, the economy doesn't function, right? So consumers can't able to
maybe
interact.
I will just ask this, right? So because you want your data streaming platform now to be essential for the AI readiness, right? And you can simplify, say, things like data access, assuring data quality, and maybe even enabling governance. Can you elaborate a little more on how these capabilities can actually translate to faster AI deployment? Because I think enterprise, usually they have a lot of compliance conversations, they have a lot more governance conversations. How do you all actually navigate that?
Yeah, so I think the areas you talked about when it comes to, we have obviously a schema registry. We have a pretty, I would say, stringent focus on role-based access. We want the data that's streaming to be relevant and have strict security and governance in the context of the applications or the access that you have for the data. So if you think of the world of AI, it becomes not only important for you to have that data in real time and to be able to do it in a secure manner, but then you want to be able to, in some cases, and a lot of the AI data has sensitivity around, maybe when I gave you the example of the outpatient
Correct.
calls, you have context of patient data, right? And there may be certain conversations
because they're hyper compliant and they need all
correct,
PI,
HIPAA
even PI
compliant,
data.
and they need and obviously there may be certain other areas that they're treating those patients. So just being able to serve that data securely and in the context, I think the most challenging part is in the context where it understands, hey, when I spoke to patient Joe had the following and the follow-ups were this, and now in the current context of the conversation and the relevant drug medications that he's on or the challenges he's now in real time articulating, and he may be saying, look, I need additional help on the following areas, or I'd like to speak to a doctor. Being able to serve that in real time and to be able to securely do it in a context of localized sovereigns, and then also in context of scalable systems that could be on public infrastructure, I think is the almost like the magic.
And also the added complexity of the AI responding.
Correct.
In order to pull the correct information across different sources and then stream it back in front of to the person trying to receive the information.
Yeah. And if you remember, I initially said in the context of where Confluent can play a critical part, it's also the interoperability and integration with all the respective AI ecosystem. Now, if you think about what AI is doing, it's working across microservices, working across data, lakehouses, databases, could be in a different endpoint service, to bring all that together and to do it in a secure manner and consistent manner, constantly serving that information is where I think it plays the most pivotal role.
So what would be your advice, say, to business owners of enterprises now thinking across things like data streaming, thinking about things of how to enable their AI applications to run across this kind of production workloads? what do you think would be the do's and don'ts that you will tell them to do?
Yeah. Look, I think every application, every use case has very different requirements. And so being very clear and articulating, what are they trying to actually solve, and has that been done before, right? And in many cases, if you look at the AI capability and what people are trying to do, I think in every context, there's very good learning opportunities. If you go look at what's happening in the Valley and context of even the Middle East, which I think are a little bit further ahead in some of the use case adoption, but the learning opportunities is the same. Like the challenge of sovereign doesn't change in Singapore and UAE. It's still the same challenge. The context of, we talked about that patient example where, I'd have an outbound patient service, which was AI led. Those requirements would not change in Singapore. I mean, what would change potentially is how the data sensitivity and PDPA is managed versus HIPAA and so forth in the US. And so just the regulatory compliance may change, but fundamentally the use cases will be very similar. So I would say the do's and don'ts is kind of really understand the use case, define it really well, and it's okay to have iterative process on that. You're never going to nail the use case up front. You're gonna have the ability to kind of redefine it, because what may be a very challenging use case today, Bernard, in 2 months or 3 months may no longer be the case, right? And that's just the nature of what we're dealing with AI. Every 3 to 6 months, there's been innovation that's not existed. So if you look at even the models themselves have dramatically improved. I think NVIDIA talked about some of their, I forgot what the name of the new chip is, but not Blackwell. Not Blackwell, but they're actually smaller. Very small.
A bigger one is coming up.
Correct. And it's like, this is what powered basically ChatGPT. It's free, I think, and it's kind of like amazing to see the innovation is not just consistently happening on the chipset side, but the fact that all of this translates to how the models have changed and how the models will perform is pretty remarkable. So I would say sometimes we spend a ton of time around kind of defining the use cases, making it perfect. And you want to learn the context of what's happened, how it's being relevant in the US and other places where it may have already been done. But then being able to just iteratively drive it and to do it better, I think, is a process of just constantly accepting that things are going to change, and it's not going to be, it's not going to be this way forever, right? And I think that's something that people have to adjust to, because we almost think, hey, the problem I'm solving now is going to be the same 12 months, 18 months down the track. It may not be the case, right? It may actually be the case. The hardest problem you're solving now may actually be easily solved in 6 months' time.
But the fundamentals don't change, right?
Fundamentals don't change.
One interesting thing I find when talking to CEOs, when they ask me about AI applications, or they tell me that they want to move fast and try to get the whole team to move with them. And the first thing I always ask, can you tell me where your data is? Can you tell me how the different data streams work? And then they suddenly stopped, and then it's like, oh. And then you start to probe deeper, and then they realize that they need to make investments in those areas. Do you see that happening all the time when you talk to customers, where they just tell you, hey, I would like to do this fast, but then when you start to look at the underlying, you need to really help them to educate to them why this is important?
Yeah, I would say fundamentally anything around AI, the data infrastructure is probably the most important piece, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, if there's a takeaway for your audience today, it should be like, without the data infrastructure piece being, clearly defined and having standards around that, you'll really struggle to build a scalable offering. And so you're spot on. Like, most of the challenges we see are they want to move really fast, but as we've talked about, there's been technology, there's tech debt, there's skills gaps, and there's just lack of consistency in some cases.
Yeah, which is what the report highlighted very clearly on that.
And I think we're lucky as an organization, as a company, because we're kind of redefining some of those areas, and it's a journey. It's a journey that somehow we kind of talk about our customers going through a 5-phase process where today it may just be a very small deployment, and then it becomes a central nervous system, right? So where the data streaming platform is core and central to all elements of the business, and that could be context of AI, it could be context of just servicing existing applications or modernizing applications, right? And so that entire journey, it takes a period of time. It doesn't happen overnight. So that's been, I would say, our learnings, that our customers themselves usually start departmental or silos, little individual developer project that scales to department to part of the company to enterprise-wide. And so that's how we also
Do they
work
have
with
to
them.
redesign when it comes to, say, the modernization part of the enterprise application? Let's say they want to change this particular enterprise application, say a chatbot, maybe running on old legacy infrastructure, and then decided that, hey, now I want to transfer to a data streaming because of the way how conversational AI is moving, because you were trying to have this high-speed, real-time communication with the agent and with the client. So how much of that re-architecting is now required?
It's actually a really good question. So what we've done is we built within Confluent Cloud, which is our offering, we built predefined connectors or managed connectors, right? So we have like, I think 80 odd managed connectors out of the box.
Right.
So we make it seamless for you to interact and interoperate with some of these systems out of the box.
Say a Genesis or a connection.
Exactly, right? So the CRMs of the world, the database platforms of choice and so forth, And then we've also gone and there's a whole ecosystem around this. And so that's fully managed, so Confluent manages. But there are connectors that are built part of the community, which may be self-managed. And so there's probably like 150, 180 connectors.
So you also have like, say, a marketplace or some kind of third-party providers that can actually help to actually customize Confluent to, say, maybe certain specific use cases.
Yeah, so what we find is there's a whole bunch of ecosystem community-based connectors out there as well. So Confluent has its own, and we obviously want to make sure our connectors are scalable, enterprise grade, and so forth. But there are a ton of community connectors which have all sorts of use cases, and someone's found a particular connector that they want to build and interoperate. So when you talk about kind of like these legacy systems, it's about unlocking it. So we may not have a native Kafka client, but someone's built a custom connector that talks to that protocol and serves it as Kafka. So there are multiple ways around it, and so I think that's been a really interesting way for our organization, our customers to benefit. It's like they don't have to necessarily rip and replace, but they're interoperating through a protocol which is now built by someone who's built in the community.
Yeah, because what I think is one of like the untold stories of AI applications or generative AI per se is actually the modernization. And you can think about, say, like a COBOL programmers. Now you can use a lot of the generative AI to move them from COBOL to Java. And then, that also comes together with the financial data streams that we are talking about in neobanking, transaction banking. So that's why the whole concept of thinking about modernization where data streaming is involved is actually not an easy task. That's why I thought that question would be good. Was actually very interesting when you told me, actually there are actually connectors to get that. But I have this question for you, right? What's the one question that you wish more people would ask you about Confluent or DSPs?
I think the most obvious is around interoperability, right?
Oh, so I'm going to ask you the question. What about the interoperability?
So how do we better work across? Like, if you think one of the biggest challenges is I have all these disparate systems. I have all this fragmented data. How do I interlock? How do I unlock this data? And how do I make it easy and seamless for me to share that data? And so I think there's probably a lack of awareness around some of the amazing things we're doing around how we provide that interoperability through Kafka as a standard protocol. And we have our entire Connect ecosystem, which is we actually have a program called Connect with Confluent, CWC, where you can come and even build custom connectors, as I mentioned earlier, or you can just leverage our connectors, pre-built connectors, right? But to do that across the enterprise domain or to do that across your entire infrastructure is pretty impressive. And so many cases, customers don't realize the power of our connectors. They understand Kafka because they've already built something ground up Kafka, but you may have other stuff which doesn't work as well, and that's where we could really unlock and harness the power of data.
Oh, wow. That I didn't realize. So what does great look like for Confluent and within your region of interest? Say, what does success really means for the business in the next 5 years for you?
Yeah, I mean, we've been probably experiencing some of the most, I would say, aggressive growth in the region. If you look at our business, and I've been with the company for just over 3 and a bit years, and since I've seen the business in Asia Pacific grow, our Southeast Asia business continues to hum along. Our India business has been probably one of our strongest performing businesses, and Australia has been obviously a foundational part of our growth journey. So if I was to look the next 5 years, I think our business will become even larger. The interesting part is the adoption of of some of these technologies and just the scale of these technologies, like what we're serving in Indonesia and India and in China for that matter, are very, very large economies which have tremendous appetite for some of these data systems. So we talked about NPCI, we talked about payments. That problem is in billions, right? And so when you think
it's going to be in trillions.
It's going to be, well, they're going to get to 100 billion transactions a day. How many systems in the world do that, right? And so when you think about the context of what we're solving and the scale of the systems, I think there's just so much to be done. Over the next 5 years, I think you'll see more and more emergence of that in this region more than any other region. Like Europe's heavily regulated, but still doesn't have the same level of scale and sophistication in some cases on the tech. And I would argue that some of the innovation that we're seeing in Asia is actually a little bit further ahead of Europe. And that's not because Europe's not capable. It's just the heavily regulated industries make it a little bit more challenging for them to move. But then we also have a very unique problem, when we're solving for billions of people. For us, the fact that we can move a little bit quicker makes this a very unique market. So 5 years down the track, I think Confluent's Asia Pacific business will be probably, I'm saying is one of the largest components of growth for the company.
Do you think significantly it's going to be powered mainly by generative AI applications or AI applications from the enterprise on that whole?
I have no doubt. I think over the next five years, we'll see a massive transformation across how we interact with applications. We today are very much mobile led, and I think that mobile experience will become more AI generative led.
Where maybe you can go to glasses,
yeah,
or maybe even you wave your hand and
it's
some
already happening, right? Where
up.
Today you have the glasses, maybe there'll be gesture control, more interaction there, or if we can get these neural chips working correctly. I think that's going to be really an exciting era, and I don't think it's too far. Like we're talking in the context of robo taxis coming out by 27. In Dubai, where I spend time as well. They're going to start that next year, I think. So it's actually not too far away.
And actually, almost everything that we just talked about in the last 30 seconds to a minute, data streaming will enter into the lens so that you can see the real-time information. And then the self-driving cars needs to be able to access all that. Is actually data streaming platforms is very important.
So it's what I refer to as AI on the edge. You have to be able to serve the data on the edge. And that's, again, where Kafka is so important, right? Where your decisions are made on the edge. You can't wait for something good to go back to the cloud. If I'm driving my Tesla and I need to be able to process all that information within my own processor on the car, I'm not going to send the query back to the cloud and say, hey, can you make a decision while I'm driving? That would be a bad outcome. So AI on the edge is a very important part. And that's where a lot of these embedded systems actually leverage Kafka as a protocol.
Kamal, many thanks for coming on the show, and I really appreciate this conversation. I think you actually bring a very interesting dimension. I think a lot of my audience may not know the importance of why data streaming platforms, specifically in the data side, is so important to what's going to power all the generative AI applications, or even all the next few form factors from glasses to self-driving cars. So in closing, I always have two quick questions. Any recommendations which have inspired you recently?
Well, I still work for an amazing guy, and I think you should. I spend a lot of time. He's one of my mentors. Someone called Bipul Sinha. He's the CEO and founder of a company called Rubrik.
Okay.
They're in the cybersecurity space, and he's been. He always inspires me to do amazing things. He moved to Americas when he was straight out of college. He kind of went to IIT. Failed a few times before he got into IIT in India. But then he ended up being in America and built this amazing company. And I think way he defines it is that, ultimately everyone has a vision or everyone has a dream. How big you make that is really the limitation you enforce on yourself. And, it's kind of like a interesting perspective on it. But, he really, I think, exemplifies the creative approach of just having no limits, and he continues to do amazing things. So I learned a lot from him, and he has interesting posts. I encourage you guys to go check those posts out. Okay. And if you want a good read, Hard Things About Hard Things is great. Like Andreessen and Ben and Mark have a great book on their journey of building company and just some of the hard decisions that you have to make when you're building companies. Both I would say very aspirational and good reads.
And how do my audience find you? And please feel free to tell me, because I'm probably going to put a link to the data streaming report. But what else do you need to know about you? Or
Yeah, of course, I'm on LinkedIn, so you can find me on LinkedIn. That's pretty easy. But also check out Confluent's website, so confluent.io. You'll learn a lot more about data streaming. We in fact just launched the Data Monster as a theme. So it's a fun way for us to describe the challenges of data fragmentation and silos and so forth.
And you then definitely find us on any channel from Spotify to YouTube and of course LinkedIn as well. Come on, many thanks for coming on the show and thank you for sharing.
I appreciate you having me here. Thank you so much.